Welcome to this short conversation about the Washington State PTA Uniform Bylaws revision, on which you'll have an opportunity to vote at the upcoming 2015 convention. This is Karen Matson, Chair of the Bylaws Committee. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with the rest of the committee, whose names you see on the screen before you, for the past year or so as we've prepared for this revised bylaws that will be presented at convention. There's a wide variety of geography represented, as you can tell by the various region numbers, but what you can't tell by looking at this list is that there's also a wide variety of PTA experience, both in terms of length of experience and expertise in different areas. In addition, some of us have children who've already graduated from high school and college. Others of us still have kids in elementary school. So a very wide representation of our members. The question you might be wondering about is, why is it that the Washington State PTA bylaws are important to us at the local PTA and council level? The answer is that these bylaws not only govern the Washington State PTA, they also govern regions, councils, and local PTAs, including your PTA, by virtue of the fact that there are uniform bylaws that govern all of the various constituents of the organization. At the April 17th to 19th, 2015 Washington State PTA Convention, to be held in Bellevue this year, those of you who are voting delegates representing your local PTAs and councils will have the chance to cast a vote on the revised WSPTA uniform bylaws. They are current, they are relevant, they are streamlined, they are updated. You might find yourself wondering why the bylaws are being changed again. We've developed a pattern as an organization over the years of nearly every year making a number of small tweaks or updates to the bylaws. This has resulted in a set of bylaws that are leggy, repetitive, and in some cases have contradictory parts. We needed, your board of directors decided that it was time to update these bylaws to meet our current needs, to do a careful revision and overhaul of the bylaws to include any changes that would enhance the effectiveness of the Washington State PTA, reduce and simplify the bylaws by removing administrative rules, and basically just clarify, simplify, and eliminate duplicated language so that the bylaws are more accessible by our members. What's different this year is that the bylaws are fully revised. That is, there are not small amendments to existing bylaws. This is a whole new set of current, relevant, streamlined bylaws. As the committee prepared to do this work, we want you to know that we did a great deal of preparatory work. We started by studying pertinent documents. We became very familiar with our own bylaws, with the Washington State PTA Articles of Incorporation, with our policies, with state and federal laws that impact the WSPTA and its constituent organizations. We also collected and analyzed the state bylaws of all the other 54 parts of the Washington State PTA. We read them, we looked through them for good ideas. We looked through them for ways in which they were different and talked about whether those differences would be good for us or not good for us. And we even took a chance to visit with a number of representatives of those states because several of us attended the National PTA Convention last spring in Austin, Texas. We also took into consideration the work of past Washington State PTA task forces. Many times over the years, groups of people have been convened to consider issues such as whether the region, geographic lines of the regions are drawn appropriately, whether the work is apportioned across the members of the WSPTA Board of Directors appropriately, whether some other arrangement of members of that Board of Directors would be more efficient. We consulted with Washington State PTA past presidents as well as other experts, including the attorney who advises the Washington State PTA. We consulted with our parliamentarian, Raleigh Cox. We consulted with Leanne Hawkins, the current WSPTA secretary, to align these bylaws structurally with the Washington State PTA Style Guide, and with Karen Fisker Anderson to be sure that the formatting in the bylaws was appropriate. And we also spent quite a lot of time soliciting input from our members through survey and through region meetings over the course of the past year. When we began this work, we set a number of standards for ourselves to try to figure out, to compare each proposed change to. We asked ourselves about each of the changes, whether the proposed change would help the WSPTA accomplish its mission or goals, and or enhance the reputation of the organization, or improve services to members or constituent organizations, or enhance our ability to attract and retain members, or conserve resources in the form of time or money. If a proposed change didn't do any of these things, we rejected it. As it turned out, we ended up with 4 categories of proposed changes. We think that it's important to remove the duplications in the bylaws. We think it's important to clarify and simplify and make consistent the language and the formatting of the bylaws. We decided that we needed to move some portions of the bylaws to other, more appropriate documents. And then we are proposing a number of substantive changes which meet this, each of which meets the standards, one or more of the standards described earlier. So to talk about each of these categories of changes, first of all, the duplications. Articles 5 and 6 in the current bylaws relate to local PTAs and council. They were each 6 pages long, and they had very, very few differences between them. We combined them, and in a few cases, when you read what is now Article 5 in the proposed bylaws, the revised bylaws, in a few cases we called out something specific about a local PTA or something specific about a council. These articles were each 6 pages long, and really there were so few differences between them. We made it a point to list nearly every requirement or expectation in one and only one place in the bylaws. And the result of these decreases, largely of these decreases, is a reduction of about 9 pages in the length of the document, down from about 27 to about 17 pages. The next category of changes was to clarify, simplify, and make the language consistent. For example, in the current bylaws, local units are referred to as local units or PTAs or local PTAs. We've made the decision to refer to the PTAs that exist in districts, sometimes across districts, as in the case of special ed PTAs, but most often as affiliated with a particular school, to refer to those as local PTAs. I think that's how people outside PTA think of them. We decided that we thought the term local unit was so specific to PTA that it might not be an accessible idea to people outside PTA. We consistently used the terms shall, may, and may not throughout the document. These are terms that appear in Robert's Rules of Order, which is our parliamentary authority, and they have a very specific meaning. We had all kinds of verbs scattered throughout the document, verbs that meant the same thing as the parliamentary shall means, like must or will. But for consistency, we consistently use the term shall when we're indicating that something has to happen, an action must be taken. If an action is optional, we consistently use the term may. And if an action simply may not, cannot, shall not, will not be taken, must not be taken, we use the parliamentarily appropriate may not. We align the style to the official Washington State PTA Style Guide. This is a relatively new document for our organization. The current Washington State PTA Secretary, Leanne Hawkins, devised this style guide when she first came into office. It's designed to make our documents have a consistent look and feel, and we wanted to make sure that the bylaws, the revised bylaws, adhere to that consistent look and feel. And finally, we found some minor inconsistencies within the bylaws. We fixed those. The third type of change was that we moved some portions of the bylaws to more appropriate documents. As an example, we are proposing the development of a Standards of Affiliation document, which will be put together by a committee of the board. It'll detail expectations for what a local PTA or a council needs to do in order to be in good standing with the Washington State PTA. There are a number of items scattered across the current bylaws that talk about what it means to be a local PTA or council in good standing. We think they need to be placed all together in one place in a document outside the bylaws. That document will be readily available, of course, to each local PTA and council. A number of items we think needed to be moved to training documents and training classes. There were some things prescribed in the bylaws that are actually required by law. And because they're required by law, that means they don't need to be included in bylaws. They need to be included in a training session and documents such as PTA in the law, which describes to our members what it is they have to do to remain compliant with the law. And then finally, there were a number of items that we thought needed to be moved out of bylaws into a policy document. The screen or the standard we use to decide what should go where in this case was that we wanted the bylaws to tell our members what needed to happen, what the rule was, what the regulation was, what the expectation was, and not so much how that expectation or rule or requirement was to be carried out. Those sorts of changes, those sorts of things will be moved out of the bylaws and into a policy document. The policies will, of course, be available to the members. Then there were a number of other changes. And these changes, so aside from the kind of cosmetic changes that I was describing earlier, the changes that moved some things to other documents, the changes that made language more consistent, the changes that removed duplications. These are more substantive changes which will have an impact on 4 different areas of our organization. The first is local PTAs and councils. The second is Washington State PTA. The third is the Washington State PTA Board of Directors and Executive Committee. And finally, Convention and Legislative Assembly. So we'll delve into each of those briefly. First, a couple of slides summarizing changes that impact local PTAs and councils. We are proposing that we change the election date requirement for officers from local PTAs and councils from April 30th, which is the current expectation, to the end of the fiscal year. We were hearing, our bylaws committee members were reporting that people were telling them that it's sometimes difficult to get those officers elected by April 30th. We realized that really it doesn't matter when they're elected as long as they're in place by the end of the fiscal year. We're making a proposal to reduce the notice for special meetings of both the Board of Directors and the members from 10 to 5 days. Special meetings are those meetings that may be called in addition to or in between regular meetings. So, for example, maybe your PTA board meets, your local unit board, your local PTA board meets every first Tuesday. Something might occasionally come up that would require a meeting in between those regular meetings. The regular meetings your members know about because you've posted them probably on your website or in your bylaws or your standing rules, any one of a number of places, or you've announced them at meetings. But if you have a special meeting, it's required by parliamentary law that you let your members know that there's going to be a special meeting. The current bylaws require a notice of 10 days. We thought it was important to shorten that notice. We figured that if you're having a special meeting of your board of directors or a special meeting of your members, it probably is related to something that is emergent or fairly important to get done quickly, and a week and a half notice requirement makes the meeting out there a ways. So it made sense to us to shorten that notice time from 10 to 5 days. We researched Washington State PTA nonprofit law and found that this would be within the law. We're introducing, as I mentioned earlier, a standards of affiliation document to define the requirements of good standing. We're removing the requirement to elect alternates to the nominating committee for a local PTA or a council. Previously, the current bylaws require that you elect 3 members and at least 3 members and 2 alternates. And we are proposing that we remove the requirement to elect alternates and to simply set the number of members of the nominating committee at 3. A few more changes. We thought it was important to require that financial records be submitted to the Financial Review Committee by July 31st. The current bylaws and the proposed revised bylaws do require a financial review each and every year. There was previously no date set to indicate when the records had to be submitted, and we decided to recommend a date to you of July 31st. This allows the treasurer to have a month after the end of the fiscal year to get the records in order so that that financial review can be done. We had, in the current bylaws, there are specific regulations about how members are to be notified about meetings and how a vacancy in office in the local PTA or a council is to be filled. We decided that the uniform bylaws should not make that decision for every local PTA and council. Instead, the local PTA and council should be able to make that decision for itself. You can see in the second bullet here, by the way, even we haven't integrated the use of the term local PTA into all of our thinking yet, because it still says local unit there. I apologize for that. We thought it made sense for the local PTAs and councils to make those requirements clear in their own standing rules. So the bylaws will say that you will be including in your standing rules the method of notifying members of meetings and the method of filling a vacancy in office if it occurs in your PTA. This third bullet applies to situations where some local PTAs have trouble meeting the minimum 25-member requirement. These are often local PTAs in very small districts serving very small schools, and it can be difficult to recruit and have 25 people join. They are able to submit a waiver, a request to have that requirement waived, but there was never a deadline date for that. And the region directors have suggested that we include in these proposed revised bylaws a deadline date, and they have agreed to a date. They thought a sufficient date was February 1st. And finally, we're proposing in the bylaws to allow online banking in accordance with rules set up by the Washington State PTA. Currently, the current bylaws prohibit the use of a WSPTA, a PTA credit card or debit card, or online banking. We're proposing that some online banking should be allowed. Changes that impact the Washington State PTA. These indirectly, at least, also impact local PTAs and councils, but they won't have the same sort of day-to-day impact that those changes listed on the previous two slides would. And so quickly, we're proposing officially defining the fiscal year as July 1 to June 30th. This is the fiscal year of the Washington State PTA and all of its constituent organizations, but in the course of our review of the documents, we discovered that it wasn't listed anywhere. And so we're adding a clause to that effect. We're proposing that members of the Washington State PTA nominating committee be elected with a plurality rather than a majority vote, and we want to make their term 2 years long. The Washington State PTA nominating committee consists of 5 members, 2 of whom are elected by the Board of Directors, the State PTA Board of Directors, and 3 of whom are elected by our members at convention. Currently, the requirement is that they be elected with a majority vote. And so if there were 4 or 5 or 6 people running for these 3 spots, it could be that the vote would have to be taken over and over and over again until 3 people received a majority vote. We think that it makes more sense to allow for a plurality vote. The term for the nominating committee will go from 1 to 2 years for a reason that will become clear in a few minutes, and I'll refer back to this when we get to that point. We're proposing shortening the notice requirement for bylaws changes from 50 days to 30 days to allow our members a little bit more time and flexibility in getting their reviewing bylaws and getting any proposals for changes in. We are proposing that we remove the specific membership fee amount from the bylaws. We take out the number that says what the current membership fee is. But we will be we're proposing retaining the requirement that any change to the membership fees have to be approved by the members at convention. So the members will not lose the opportunity to have an impact on the membership fees. It's just that if the membership fees do change, if it's recommended that they change by the State PTA Board of Directors, and if the members agree to change them, It will not require a change to the bylaws. In terms of the Washington State PTA Board of Directors, we're proposing changing the notice time to call a special meeting of the board from 10 to 5 days here, just as we talked about earlier, proposing that same change for local PTAs and councils and their boards. In addition, the current requirement for calling a special meeting is that 15 members of the board of directors have to agree to do that. We're proposing changing that wording from 15 to a majority for a reason that I'll talk about in just a moment. I'll come back to this in a moment. Nowhere in the bylaws does it currently allow for the removal of a board member, and we're proposing making that a possibility, but setting the very high standard of the very high bar of requiring a vote of agreement of 3/4 of the current members of the board of directors. So if a person is not able to serve or willing to serve or not serving in a productive fashion, by a vote of 3/4, the board could remove that person from her or his position. Currently, the bylaws say that the executive committee, so just the 4 elected officers plus 1 more member elected by the board, has the job of evaluating the executive director. We're proposing saying that it is the board of directors who should evaluate the executive director. The executive director of Washington State PTA is hired by the full board. It seems important to us that the full board have the opportunity to participate in the evaluation as well. We're proposing requiring 2 years of board service as a prerequisite to become president or vice president of the Washington State PTA. The current requirement is for only 1 year of service on the Washington State PTA board. And finally, for this slide, we're proposing that all the members of the board be elected in odd-numbered years. Currently, the bylaws require that half the members of the board, PTA president and vice president, and a few of the state directors and half of the region directors are elected in 1 year, and then the balance of the board is elected in another year. We saw this sort of arrangement in many of the other states that we looked at in talking to our colleagues across the country. They talked about the benefits of having the whole board come on at the same time and serve a solid 2 years together with no up and running time in the middle of that 2-year term necessary, since everyone will already be familiar with their roles. We felt that this would be a much more productive way to do business on the state board. A few more changes. We're proposing retaining region directors. Currently, there's 1 region director for each of the 13 regions across the state, elected to serve on the board of directors and to serve their member local PTAs and councils. We're proposing that those region directors are solely service positions. That is, their only jobs will be, if these bylaws are adopted, to serve the local PTAs and councils, to prepare trainings, to help with troubleshooting if there's a problem, to help set up new PTAs and new councils. And we are proposing removing the requirement that those region directors attend board meetings. And because those region directors currently serve as the representation of our members to the board, we were not unaware of the fact that we would need to provide for direct representation. And so we're proposing that 5 area vice presidents be elected by our members to represent areas determined by the board. Each of these 5 area vice presidents would cover a geographic area that is made up of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 current regions. There's no proposal to change the way the regions are drawn. The 5 area vice presidents would be required to reside in the area that they serve, and they'll be elected only by delegates from that area, not by voting delegates from all across the state. In order to serve in this capacity, a candidate for area vice president will have to have served at least 1 year as a region director or have served 1 year on the state PTA board of directors. Their responsibilities will be to serve as a representative of the members in their area to the board, to support the work of the region directors and the service delivery teams, to appoint the region directors with approval of the Executive Committee, the Washington State PTA Executive Committee, and to approve appointments of the service delivery team members. Those appointments will be made by the region directors themselves. So when we come back to two of the things that I said I'd come back to in a moment, the reason that we're requesting that we change the term of the state PTA nominating committee from 1 year to 2 years is that if all of the officers, all of the members of the board of directors are elected in 1 year, it could turn out that someone will need to resign for one reason or another, and the nominating committee would be called upon to fill an interim vacancy. We would hope and fully anticipate that all the members of the board of directors would, and there would be 14 of them, would serve out their full 2-year term, and the nominating committee would only do its work initially, finding candidates for those positions, and not be called upon to work in the interim year, but it's possible that they would. And you'll recall, if we go back a slide or two, we were reducing the number of board members, Washington State PTA board members, to call a special meeting from 15 to a majority. Currently, the board has, I believe, is 23 members, so 15 was a reasonable number of people to expect to be in agreement to call a special meeting. However, if these bylaws are adopted, the size of the Washington State PTA board will be reduced to 14. And so there needs to be a change in the number of people that are required to call a special meeting, and we chose to recommend a majority. So 7 or more would have to be, or actually 8 or more, would have to be in agreement. And we have a few proposed changes for Washington State PTA Convention and Legislative Assembly. Proposed changes for both of them, we are proposing that we increase the number of voting delegates for local PTAs significantly. Currently, in the current bylaws, if you have up to 200 members, you get 2 voting members, and then you get another voting delegates rather, and then you get another voting delegate for every 200 additional members. We're proposing that for both convention and legislative assembly, if you have up to 200 members, you automatically get 4 voting delegates, and then for each additional 100 members, you get 1 additional delegate. So if you have 299 members, you'd get 4. If you have 300 members, you'd get 5. If you have 400 members, you'd be able to bring 6 voting delegates. In addition, we're proposing increasing the number of council voting delegates from 2 for each council to 4 from each council. We're proposing for convention to lower the quorum from 200 members to 150 members. And similarly for legislative assembly, we're proposing lowering the quorum from 150 members to 100 members. There have been occasions in the past when the business of the convention and or the legislative assembly has been interrupted because there were not enough members present. Our parliamentarian has helped us understand that it's important to set a quorum which is at the lowest number where you really feel that enough people have had input to a decision to make it a solid decision, and not at such a high number that it can be difficult to get business done. Thus, these proposals for lower quorum. In addition, regarding legislative assembly, we are proposing allowing the board to decide each year whether to have a legislative assembly rather than to require, per the bylaws, that a legislative assembly occur each and every year. We don't have any expectation in the immediate future that legislative assembly would change, but this does allow for some flexibility if the legislative committee were to come up with another way to prepare the legislative program. And then there are 3 provisos that need to be added. I know these look confusing on the surface. The provisos are little messages that are added at the end of a set of proposed bylaws when there's going to be a transition over the course of the next year or 2 as the new bylaws come into effect. And there's certainly going to be a transition here. If our members vote to adopt these revised bylaws, we're going to go from a situation where half the members of the state PTA Board of Directors are elected in odd-numbered years and the other half are elected in even-numbered years to a situation where all of them are elected in odd-numbered years. And so these provisos lay out a way to transition from that every other year plan to the every year plan while providing consistent representation for our regions over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. We have a chart available which will help you understand how we got to each of these provisos. If you would like, we would be happy to provide that to you at any time, and I'm going to give you an email address where you can address any questions. We'd be more than happy to talk with you about them. What you can expect at convention is this. At the April 17 to 19, 2015 convention, you're going to be voting on these revised bylaws. You'll need to plan to read and review the proposals before convention. You'll have to submit any proposed amendments 2 hours before the voting session. So the proposed amendments will have to be submitted Saturday in the morning sometime, and we'll be getting out definitive information about how to do that. The bylaws will be voted on Saturday afternoon. We're asking that proposed amendments be submitted 2 hours ahead of the session at which the bylaws will be voted on to give us time to prepare them, get them up on the screen, and make sure that there's the opportunity to have a good conversation about them. We'll be voting on a full section at a time. We won't be voting on every single change independently. You can count on finding in the schedule a time when you'll be able to sit down with Bylaws Committee members and process these new proposed bylaws. And also we'll be happy to help you write any proposed amendments that you think are important, help you understand the impact of the proposed changes, and if you think an amendment needs to be considered by the body, we'll help you write that amendment. So we're looking forward to the opportunity to interact with you at convention. Hopefully you'll find it a very positive experience. To help you prepare to cast your vote or to advise your voting delegates as to how to vote, on the WSPTA website at www.wastatepta.org, you'll find 4 resources. First, there's the proposed revised bylaws. Secondly, there's about a 4-page letter to the WSPTA members, which includes a summary of each of the proposed changes. Actually, I think it's 3 pages. Then there's a document which will have a rationale for each of the major proposed changes, so that you'll have a chance to read about why we are making the proposal, the suggestion that we are, and you will also find a link to this webcast, which you can view at home or at a PTA meeting. Please feel free to share any information about this process with your local PTA or council. Anything you see in leadership news or on the website or other WSPTA publications, you can cut and paste and put them into newsletters or any other communication devices that you use to communicate with your members. We very much appreciate your interest in this process, and we really appreciate your thoughtful participation. These bylaws, as we noted earlier and as you've heard as you've listened through this presentation, can have a major impact on the way you do business. We hope you'll think this will be a positive impact. In the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach us all at bylaws@wastatepta.org. You can send us questions or concerns. It will be I who will receive that email, but anything I receive, I will immediately share with all of my colleagues on the Bylaws Committee. So you truly will be interfacing with all of us when you send us a message. It's been my pleasure to spend this time with you. Feel free to drop us an email if you'd like to talk about any of this, and thank you again for your participation.